This is Changemakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
I'm back with Grace Ruiz-Stepter, the Director of Housing and Community Development for the City of Anaheim, who has worked in the housing industry for nearly 30 years. Grace, prior to moving to Anaheim, you served in leadership positions with the Housing Authority of Los Angeles County. For those less familiar with Anaheim, it is situated roughly 20 miles south of the city of Los Angeles. So, given your previous experience in LA, a region facing considerable housing challenges, are you observing similar housing affordability issues and shortages there in Anaheim?
Thank you for that question. In Anaheim, our challenges are probably very similar to some of our other urban cores in that there's just simply not enough affordable housing. Our rents have not kept pace with wages, and therefore it's really created this pressure point on affordable housing for us to produce as many units as possible and as in an expedited manner as we possibly can. My work here in Anaheim right now is really about setting the stage for the next 10 years in terms of having an active pipeline with realistic numbers, identifying where that money is going to come from. California, once upon a time, Anaheim was a very robust redevelopment agency. We had set up portions of our city that had seen some blight and invested. And so as a result of that, we had a decent amount of tax increment money coming back to our redevelopment agency. And under state law, 30% of that was coming to housing. And the 30% was because we had extended how long our redevelopment areas would be in existence. So that kicked off something like $17 million for housing investment every single year. That went away in 2011 as a result of some state lawsuits between redevelopment agencies and the city. So the last several years have really been about how do we find other money to keep us innovating and building at the pace that we were building prior or during the redevelopment days. And so the state has come forward with a couple of funding sources, nowhere near what redevelopment was, but we're still thankful for it, in the form of a tax on fee on recordings of changes in properties, which now is starting to kick off some money. So that's one source of money. Obviously, we take advantage of the Light Tech program, probably like every other large housing authority in our state and in the nation. But we're also looking to how do we create local funds. We happen to be parked in a place where there is a large amusement park, a couple of sports teams and what have you, and now some larger Four Diamond hotel products. And we are all in conversations about how does this economic engine that Anaheim is so blessed with, how do we now use and harness the energy of all of these big engines to also help with affordable housing? So those conversations are very promising, and we're in the very early discussions are around, how do we form a local housing trust fund, which I know exists in many jurisdictions. And so we're certainly won't be recreating the wheel. We'll be borrowing ideas from other folks. I think, but the number of stakeholders at the table who want to be a part of it and who may be willing to contribute may be a little bit more unique. And it's something that we're really looking to take full advantage of. We've really keeping an eye also on emerging needs. Throughout California, I think a lot of us have really paid a lot of attention to the fact that homelessness is a real issue for us. We can't ignore it. We really need to be about trying to solve that. But sometimes when you have a crisis of this nature, there's a bit of a temptation to take your eye off the ball of other things just because homelessness is such a great issue and requires all hands on deck. But other things that we really need to pay attention to and are paying attention to is affectionately known as the silver tsunami. We know that folks that are retiring in And now that retirement check isn't enough to keep up with rent. So really trying to get into the space of trying to come up with some creative ideas about how we help seniors stay in place, whether that be in a rental situation or even in a homeownership situation. We are finding seniors that are struggling even when they're homeowners.
Are there several categories that you're actually seeing the need is, or is it just sort of all over the place?
We have a need in almost every spectrum of housing. Young folks who've gone to college, done all the right things, cannot afford to own a home in California. So that's one piece of the pie that we are trying to come up with solutions for. We have what we call our missing middle, which is those folks that are working and still struggling to pay rent. Those are populations that we care about and we're trying to come up with tools for. But I think the ones that we're critically aware of and working a little bit more feverishly around is that senior population. So here in Anaheim, we have created a new program called our Senior Safety Net program, cobbling together funding from different sources to pay for case management, to pay for short-term instances of up to $5,000, maybe falling behind with rent, either because of a medical bill or some other unforeseen circumstances. So that is, in essence, an eviction diversion type of a program, because sometimes that's enough to keep somebody stable. But within that continuing, also using the resources that come to us from our home program to stand up a tenant-based rental assistance program that will help seniors gain access to rent assistance for 24 months while we help them to figure out whether we can transition them into the Section 8 program or maybe one of our project-based voucher buildings or a tax credit buildings, or maybe family steps in or roommate situation works out, a whole multitude of things that could happen. But I think to your question right now, the population that we're laser focused in addition to the homeless, is our seniors, because we're seeing that the demographics show that the largest demographic of homeless that is increasing is our senior population.
What kind of numbers are we talking about within that senior population, or projections over the next, 1 year, 5 year, 10-year terms? Have you guys done studies to give an indication?
I don't have precise numbers on that. I know that our last point in time count showed a 10 to 15% increase in our homeless population at the age demographic. That was 55.
Okay. Yeah.
And the anecdotal information that I have, which is really what's causing, this sense of urgency within us, is that we do run a local shelter, 325 beds. That's our Anaheim specific shelter. And then regionally, there's a county shelter of about the same amount of beds, and a neighboring city has another shelter similar. So combined, about 1,000 beds of shelter. And when we get together and we talk as service providers, we are routinely talking to each other about the fact that we are seeing people who are older. And when I mean older, I'm talking about 50, I'm not talking 50s, so we're talking about 70 and 80 showing up at our shelters, and in some cases in wheelchairs and what have you. So while the data is emerging, and certainly our next point in time count will really probably be the most informative in terms of what that increase looks like, we are seeing it every day in our shelters.
It's so concerning to kind of hear this. I think you called it the silver tsunami. Do you have access to land and builders and nonprofits, and are you guys doing all of that yourself?
So land is scarce. We are largely built out, which is why something like a motel conversion ordinance and money for motels is such a promising model, because you can take things that you can repurpose what's there. So currently, we've been focused on housing our homeless with permanent supportive housing, but motels can potentially offer a model also for some of our seniors that are aging in place, as long as there is room to create some community space for the socialization and maybe for bringing on the services on site. So we're certainly looking at motels as an option for this population as well. The Housing Authority has when we can, we do assemble land. We do own about 5 or 6 parcels that have been acquired over time, and we do actively engage in assembling land to make sure that it's viable. And so some things move quicker than others because we're waiting on willing sellers to make land larger. Here in Anaheim, we don't develop ourselves. We use nonprofit partners, and so our nonprofit partners certainly are quite innovative and often bring us sites that they believe may be useful, whether it be for our seniors or for our families, whatever need we have. But there's quite a landscape of nonprofit developers in Orange County, but really up and down the Southern California area that understand the need of the regions and are helping us to identify opportunities.
You have such an impressive array of things that you're doing, everything from homeless response care to development to managing several federal programs and doing it so well. When I was reading your bio and your information, there was one particular thing that stood out to me amongst all of the accomplishments, but this was a unique one, talking about some fraud prevention programs that you've created. Do you mind sharing some of those practices? Because it's sort of that ugly, I think you mentioned it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Yes. And it's not something that always we're willing to talk about, but it sounds like you guys have done some great initiatives here, and I want to share that with our larger audience.
Sure. So that stems from my career path. When I initially started, my first foray into housing was through the Section 8 program. I was a caseworker. So I think when you're trained to do eligibility, to collect data income and really look at it with an intention of helping people, but also to ensure that we're being good stewards of the public's money. And so that was the initial start of that. But I happen to have been around long enough where I remember the introduction of the EIV system, the Enterprise Income Verification System, and what a revolution that was, right? And I was at the LA County Housing Authority, which is a pretty sizable agency. And we decided that we would let everybody know through very simplistic type of messaging that, hey, these electronic computer matches are coming online. And so you may be hearing from us, hopefully not, but we may need to work on you on some of that. And I think our matches that came back in the EIV days of where we had discrepancies was in the thousands, some small, some large. And so it was such a behemoth that we had to really strategize about, okay, how much matters, what's really the big numbers, and how do we approach that? And so I happened to be there when we were thinking through that. It was put on my lap to develop a team to really come up with strategies for all of that. And so that's has stayed with me, that some of the things that come up as discrepancies, there's an explanation to it. And so you approach the family with dignity and respect, and you just have the conversation, and then that gets resolved. But then there are those other things that really and truly they're fraudulent activity. There's just no other way to describe them. And the advent of the EIV kind of, I think, opened the eyes of many of us of the fact that, as we come from a place of help, that sometimes, there's some folks that are working a little harder to maybe not be as transparent as we would like them to be. And so that really became the start for setting up fraud prevention programs that I've carried with me through my various assignments, at Memphis, now in Anaheim. And it really is about looking at a file holistically, collecting the data, letting the data tell the story, and then working with the family to work through that. We have enjoyed a partnership here, once again, with the Anaheim Police Department, where the police department will help to follow up on big cases, big fraud cases that our staff has uncovered from the perspective of trying to recover some money. That is difficult. We've only been successful in recovery in the cases where things have been quite substantial. maybe going back about a decade, substantial would have meant something in the vicinity of $30,000 or more. Now, because everybody is so busy, including courts, it has to be more than $50,000 for our DA to take that and prosecute that. Thankfully, there's not a lot of that. I think now that people understand that there is computer matching or what have you, people are more forthcoming about their information. The place that's been a little bit of a challenge for us certainly has been, I guess it's the gig economy, the Ubers, the Uber Eats and what have you, where people are making some money and they're not always forthcoming with that. And we find that usually through bank accounts. We don't try to micromanage folks, but there's a way to look at bank account statements pretty quickly and see that money's coming in and out in an unexplained manner. And so there may be money somewhere else. And so we're not afraid to ask those questions. So that's really how we're handling those things.
It has been great talking with you here. And as we wrap up, is there anything else you want to bring forward on the good things you guys are doing over in Anaheim?
No, I thank you for the time. It isn't always, we don't always make time to talk about all the great things that we're doing. And I thank you for standing up a platform where we are able to talk about these things and hopefully, gain an audience that understands that there's a lot of people working really hard to try to make an impact on some pretty big issues.
Completely agree. It has been a pleasure having you here, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Changemakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to Quadel.com. That's Quadel.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.